Many of the environmental issues that are associated with fossil fuels come from the way that we extract them. Oil and gas often are harvested, if you will, at the same time, and this is called production. So when you're producing oil and gas, you're really just pulling it from the ground. Oil and gas are found together because they are formed together, just gas is formed deeper underground. But then oil and gas are both less dense than the surrounding rock, and so they do bubble up towards the surface, and the only reason they would be retained underground is if there's a non-porous layer of rock, which is denoted on this chart or these pictures with an NP. So if there's a non-porous layer that does not allow the oil and gas to flow through it, then that oil and gas gets trapped and then it can be extracted or produced. And the way in which we do this is by drilling a well through the ground and then pump it out. So oil, it's just like how you pump groundwater out of the ground, except oil is a little more viscous, which means it doesn't flow quite as easily. Natural gas, of course, it's a gas, so it flows very easily, and it pumps out very easily too once you punch a hole in the ground. And sometimes the gas actually, they aren't even able to harness that gas. It just kind of comes out and they have to burn it off as it's coming out because they can't control the flow, or they don't have any way to harness it. And I just wanted to remind you that oil and gas are not only extracted from land surfaces but also from offshore areas. So this is a chart showing the offshore areas from which we typically harvest oil and natural gas. And you have to harvest it within 200 miles of the outer border of a country in order to have rights to that oil and gas. And so this is showing the areas in which the United States is able to extract oil and gas from offshore areas. There's a different type of oil that we are more recently starting to harvest, and that's called tar sands or oil shale. It is different from oil, and so we do have to harvest it differently. And so what tar sands are, they're a mixture of clay, sand, water, and then this very thick oil that basically cements or holds all of those soil sediments together, and that very thick oil is called bitumen. Bitumen and this tar sand is found in Canada, some of the western states of the United States, and then Venezuela. Because bitumen is very, very thick or very viscous, you can't pump it out of the ground like you can crude oil, and so instead you have to either extract the sands and process them to extract the bitumen, or you have to subject the underground area that has it to some extensive treatment. Once it's extracted, then it can be refined into oil, and actually you have to add some lighter oils to it just to make it less viscous so it can be transported through pipelines. Here's a cartoon showing one way that oil sands can be extracted. This one is showing the surface mining process. So in this case, there's a big, they're digging out a bunch of sands, and then those sands are taken by a truck over to a crusher. The crusher crushes them up into really fine pieces that makes it easier to extract the oil from. And then they go into this very large vessel. In this vessel, hot water is added to the oil sands that helps to extract that viscous oil out of the sands, and so it also makes the sands also flow because it's basically a slurry of oil and sand. And then it goes through the pipeline, and the bitumen is extracted and from the water and the sands, and then the water and the sand slurry then goes out to a pond where the water flows to the top, and the sand and clay floats to doesn't float, but settles to the bottom. And then that water gets reused to extract more bitumen. So, and then that bitumen is sent to refineries where it's turned into gasoline, jet fuel, and plastics. Sometimes they don't dig out the oil sands and instead there's an in situ extraction process that's used. In this case, steam is injected underground into the layer of oil sands, and then after the steam is there for then is injected, then it sits in there for a while and soaks, and more steam and heat is added to that system to really help get the bitumen moving and less viscous so that it can be pumped out, and then the heated oil and water are then pumped to the surface. So that's a little less invasive. You're not digging out the surface, but you can have some issues with groundwater getting contaminated if it's not a well-contained system. It used to be that we only extracted gas in the kind of traditional way that we extracted oil, and so we weren't able to extract gas from shale. Shale is a sedimentary rock, and shale can trap gas in between the layers of rock, and as a result, it's harder to get out because it's just these little layers of gas in between the layers of rock. In order to get it out, this relatively new process called fracking was developed, and in this process you can see that chemicals, water, and sand are injected underground at very high pressure, which causes fissures or cracks to form in the rock in that shale layer, and so that allows the natural gas to flow from one layer to the next down into an extraction pipe, and then that gas can be extracted with a well. Just like with oil and gas, there's more than one way to extract coal, and so while the use of coal is declining in the United States, we are still using coal to make electricity, and so coal is still being mined. There's two ways. So for coal seams that are close to the surface, so less than 200 feet below the surface, it's safer for the miners and it's more economical for the companies to dig out the topsoil, and then that exposes the coal seam below, and then so they basically move a whole mountain top from one area to another to get to that coal seam, and then they extract the coal seam. This is obviously very hard on the landscape if you're moving the entire top of a mountain in order to get to the coal. And we will talk about that in a future lecture. Another way is the deep mining, and so deep mining is used when the coal is much deeper below the surface, so up to 1,000 feet below, and obviously this is much more dangerous for the miners who have to go in and extract that coal. They have to go down elevators with deep shafts and then operate digging equipment, and you can have cave-ins and other ways that miners can get hurt or killed in the process. So those are the two main ways we mine coal.